Okay, let's unpack this quote. Who knows? Had I gone with Big Steel, maybe the Rust Belt would still be shining. Maybe more folks would know why Pittsburgh's football team is called the Steelers. That's from a blog post called Steel by Larry Dean.
Yeah, it's quite a thought, isn't it? Linking a personal career choice to, well, the fate of the Rust Belt and even a football team name. It's from his Einganeer's Line series.
Exactly. So that's our jumping off point for this deep dive. We're looking at these sources, mainly Larry Dean's take, to understand the story of Bethlehem Steel, its incredible rise, its pretty dramatic fall.
And what that whole saga tells us about things like change, competition, and maybe where the steel industry stands now.
Right. And the source really sets up this core puzzle. You have this company, Bethlehem Steel, that literally built huge chunks of modern America. We're talking the Empire State Building, Golden Gate Bridge, Hoover Dam.
Not to mention supplying so much for the World War II effort. I mean, a true industrial powerhouse.
Absolutely. So how does that company end up filing for bankruptcy in 2001?
And then just ceasing operations altogether in 2003. It's a steep fall.
So the source touches on the usual suspects, right? The external stuff.
Yeah, it mentions things like intense global competition, huge pension liabilities they just couldn't handle anymore, and, high labor costs in the U.S.
Okay, those are definitely big pieces. But what this source really emphasizes, the author's core argument, is that the real killer, the underlying reason, was management. Specifically, the resistance to change.
Exactly. The idea presented is that they got stuck. They prioritized maybe keeping profits looking good in the short term, maintaining things as they were.
Instead of making those tough, probably expensive, but really necessary investments for the future.
Precisely. And the big technological shift they supposedly missed the boat on was something called continuous casting.
Continuous casting. Okay, so what exactly is that compared to the old way?
Well, think of the old way like baking cakes one by one. You pour molten steel into these big molds called ingots, let them cool, then process them. Batch work. Continuous casting. It's more like a continuous stream. Molten steel goes in one end, and it's directly shaped into basic forms like slabs or billets coming out the other end, nonstop.
So like an assembly line directly for steel shakes. Makes sense.
And the source stresses why it was such a big deal. You got way more usable steel, so better yield. The quality was more consistent. It boosted productivity massively and cut costs significantly. Huge efficiency gains.
And the claim is this tech is why the U.S. kind of lost its top spot in steel globally.
That's the strong argument in the source. And there's this real irony pointed out. After World War II, Japan is rebuilding its industry, partly destroyed by American war machines made with, Bethlehem Steel.
Right.
And Japan, starting fresh, decided to go all in on this newer continuous casting technology.
While the established American companies like Bethlehem were maybe hesitant, didn't want to rip out the old stuff and spend big.
That seems to be the core of it, according to this perspective. U.S. Steel, another giant, eventually did adopt it, but the source says not until the early 80s.
Which was, what, too late?
Well, it helped them survive, sure, but they'd already lost so much ground, so much market share to the Japanese and others who had adopted it earlier and more fully.
Leaving them, as the author puts it, kind of anemic, struggling, needing government help even.
Yeah, needing that national security designation to help shield them a bit. And that whole history flows right into today's news, doesn't it?
You mean the proposed Nippon Steel deal?
Exactly. Japan's Nippon Steel looking to buy or merge with U.S. Steel. We're talking $14 billion plus another $14 billion promised for modernization.
Wow. So the source connects this directly back. This potential huge investment is needed because of that historical reluctance to modernize decades ago.
That's the implication. Even with talk about keeping U.S. ownership structures for security reasons, it highlights this need for a massive catch-up, driven by that past resistance to change. It's almost come full circle.
It's quite the narrative. The author even reflects personally, wondering if choosing big oil over big steel 50 years ago, if he could have somehow changed things at Bethlehem.
Yeah, but he concludes, probably not. That the resistance to fundamental change was likely just too ingrained in the management culture there.
It really hammers home the point, doesn't it? The Bethlehem Steel story, seen through this lens, is a cautionary tale about inertia, about, the high price of not changing, of putting short-term appearances over long-term health, especially when the world market is shifting under your feet.
Absolutely.
So, thinking about this whole arc, U.S. Steel leading the world with older tech, falling behind due to resisting innovation, and now potentially needing this huge foreign partnership and investment just to modernize. Oh, what does that tell you? about that constant tension between, say, national industrial pride, the reality of global competition, and just the flat out need to innovate to survive. It's something worth considering as this latest chapter unfolds.
Who knows? Had I gone with Big Steel, maybe the Rust Belt would still be shining. Maybe more folks would know why Pittsburgh's football team is called the Steelers. Maybe more coal miners would still have jobs. An Einganeer's Tale, page 23. So Bethlehem Steel offered me a job straight out of college. Bethlehem Steel, the company whose steel built the Empire State Building, the Golden Gate Bridge, Hoover Dam, and the war machines of World War II. I didn't take it. Bethlehem Steel declared bankruptcy in 2001, and ceased all operations 2 years later. Cited reasons were, international competition, the inability to meet pension obligations, large labor costs, and management's resistance to change. I believe this last reason was at the root of all the others. If Bethlehem would have embraced the technological advancements of the mid-20th century, they would have remained competitive and be a thriving company today. Instead, they chose short-term profits over long-term investments. It is ironic that steel from Bethlehem was indirectly the cause of its own demise. After World War II, partially as a result of Bethlehem's war machines, Japan had to rebuild its steel industry from scratch. They chose to do so to use a novel, unproven technology called continuous casting. Continuous casting continuously creates unfinished forms of steel from molten metal. The unfinished billets, sheets, and slabs can then be readily processed into finished products. Before this, all steel products had been created from ingots, formed by pouring molten metal into stationary molds, a batch operation. As Henry Ford had shown in the auto industry, the assembly line, a continuous operation, improves production yield, quality, productivity, and overall cost efficiency. Continuous casting did this for the steel industry. It is also the primary reason the US fell behind the rest of the world in steel production. Bethlehem was never willing to make the major investments necessary to transition to continuous casting. US Steel eventually saw the need to do so and did in the early 1980s. This kept them alive, even to this day, but it was too late for them to reclaim the market share they had lost. So they remained an anemic company, barely staying in business. If it wasn't for the government finally realizing that national security was at risk, US Steel would also be history by now. Last week, Japan's Nippon Steel agreed to acquire or partner with, the arrangement is not clear, US Steel for $14 billion, as well as also invest another $14 billion into its further modernization. Somehow, the US supposedly retains ownership, so national security concerns are not an issue. The deal promises to revive the US steel industry. Let's hope it does. 51 years ago, I chose to go with Big Oil instead of Big Steel. I'd like to think that had I gone with Bethlehem Steel, maybe I could have influenced management enough to invest in their future instead of suck out everything they could from the company then. Nah. If Big Steel's management was anything like Big Oil's back then, I probably would have pissed some people off there too and had to quit.